independent legal advice for each of you, I think, is a good idea. You have a company lawyer or a lawyer each or whatever, but getting a lawyer to talk to a lawyer, it sounds unpleasant. But I mean, when you're an agency, you're dealing with this kind of situation every time a client appoints you, right? Your lawyers talk to their lawyers and it all feels very cringe and you don't like it. But that deal is then done and you can get on with the relationship and it never really feels damaged by that. It's just, well, the legal things are there to protect everyone, actually.
My name's Mike Lander and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Stephen, thanks ever so much for joining me on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. I love the format. I love talking to amazing people like yourself. It's a brilliant way of getting to network with interesting people. So, without further ado, just tell people kind of who you are and what you do and something unusual about yourself.
So I am Stephen Kenwright. I am currently Director of Strategy and Digital Marketing at a creative content agency called Ride Shotgun. Previously co-founder of a search-first creative agency called Rise at 7. Unusual thing about myself, I have a master's degree in Shakespeare and Renaissance literature.
Oh my God. Wow. That's very niche, but very interesting.
Niche. As far as digital marketing and marketing goes, it's a bit of a niche way in, I think.
But a great way of studying content and language.
Editing, all the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. Brilliant. Okay. So let's kick off with the kind of a couple of questions that we thought we'd have a discussion around. So the first one is, could you talk about the exit journey process from Rise at 7 via an MBO? Kind of what are the key success factors and where were the real kind of potholes?
If I go back a little bit further to the reason for exiting the way that we did, when I started Rise at 7 in 2019 with my co-founder, Carrie Rose, and an angel investor, we had planned to sell the business, right? It was designed to scale extremely quickly. We knew exactly who we would sell to, which would have been probably Incubator or Crowd or Brain Labs, possibly Assembly, right? We had a really clear idea of where we were going to go, where we were going to sell to, and how we would build the business for that eventuality. And what we weren't quite as clear on were the timelines, because we thought it would probably take 5 years. And the numbers that we wanted to reach, we reached in 2.5. And there's loads of reasons for that. It was pandemic and everything kind of fell in our favor. We were very fortunate. And, I'd like to think good and hardworking and all those good things.
I was going to say. Yeah, luck is what you make, not what just happens.
Absolutely, yes. But we were in a good place to capitalize on that luck for sure.
Yeah.
So we got to the place where we wanted to get to from a numbers point of view and started those conversations. So we started talking to those agencies who, by design, were all private equity backed. We knew that was the kind of business that we wanted to sell to. And the private equity companies said, hang on, talk to us, don't talk to them. We're the ones with the money. We want to run the agency independently because it's got a big brand and there's, it's going places. So we'll talk about that strategy a little bit separately. So we started those conversations. And the thing is, like, when you start a business with the intention of selling it, things change, especially if you've not done this before. So Carrie, my co-founder, this is her first business, and she found that she loved it. This was her pride and joy. She never wants to leave Rise at 7. She doesn't want to hand over the reins to someone else. And I think that's fair enough, right? When going into those conversations about starting an agency, we've got an idea of what we want to do. Until you witness it firsthand, you don't know how it's going to go. So we had those talks and, doing...
But also, Stephen, kind of what comes next. The problem you face is, as a founder, if you're in your 30s or 40s, it's like, great, so you get a liquidity event, you get some capital out, your investor gets the money, the return they expect. But you're sat there going, what now? You can't just sit and play tennis for 30 years. So I get that. I do get that.
And that's the point. I got to that stage. I wanted to do something else. I've done search agencies. I've done those kind of things previously. And my, Rise at 7 was not a million miles away from Branded 3, the agency I'd worked for previously. Yep. And I felt like I'd been there and done it. I didn't want to carry on doing that exact thing for the long term. Whereas Carrie felt that if she was to exit Rise at 7, she'd probably do something pretty similar again. So what's the point in exiting? So we were really fortunate to have a very good relationship and able to have a conversation about that. I wanted to leave. She didn't want to leave. We had an
What scale were you, Stephen? Just for the listeners, just not the financial numbers, but the head count. Roughly how big were you?
At this point, we were 110 people.
Wow.
One of the things about building in public is there's really no such thing as trade secrets. So, we would probably have publicized that we were about 7.3 million turnover in our third year. So
wow.
a fairly sizable agency by that point. And that's what I mean about doing 5-year numbers in 2.5 years. We'd got to quite a scale very, very quickly.
And were you an organic search agency? Was that what you did? SEO?
Effectively, yes. We lived in the niche between PR and SEO. So, whereas a lot of SEO agencies have done digital PR for a number of years, including my previous agency, Branded 3, it is very much kind of just using media relations tactics for SEO. Whereas what was a little bit different and what still is a little bit different about Rise at 7 is it's quite capable of answering a PR brief about brand awareness and consideration, changing perceptions, as well as answering an SEO brief. So it's not just using the tactics, but it's actually using the strategies properly in both those things. So really it was, a digital PR agency, but maybe not in the sense that you would necessarily think of digital PR usually in the SEO space.
Yep. Brilliant. So you got to that tipping point where you wanted to exit and move on, and your business partner loved it and didn't, but you had a very good relationship, which I think is key. Lots of trust between the two of you, very open communication, nothing kind of hidden, no kind of hidden agendas. People were being very open with each other. Brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. Our complication really was we had an angel investor who was involved as well. He didn't want to leave, so that's where the negotiations became a little bit more tricky. We'd previously talked to him about potentially buying him out. He was open to that, but not on the timescales that we were working to. He wanted to stay for longer for lots of reasons. So we'd kind of made him an offer previously, and I said to my co-founder, "Look, and to our angel investor, we've made this offer to you previously. You didn't want to take that because you felt like there was more value in there. I will take that though. That value that we said that we would give you, clearly you think this is going to be a steal if you give that to me. So shall we do that?" And that one of the things that I think made the relationship stay relatively strong with me and Carrie is I was pretty clear. I'm not trying to gut the business on the way out. We've said what we thought was good value for shares to our investor. I think that's good value for shares. Give me that. And it's not then a conversation about me trying to get the maximum amount of money possible out of this that's going to leave the business in a poor financial situation. It's very much about the personal side of things. And when you kind of take that money conversation away and make it so that it's not all about the money, then you've got the opportunity to make it a little bit more civil, I think, and a little bit more clear about what you're trying to do and what you're not trying to do.
Exactly. And without putting words in your mouth, Stephen, having sold a couple of businesses before, my own perspective was when you get to a certain number, and that's a personal number, once you've achieved that number, then if someone offers you that number in the right commercial terms, well, then it's time to move on. Accept the number, leave plenty of value on the table for the people staying behind, and move on with the next stage of your life. And it sounds like that's very much where you were.
Yeah, we had appointed accountants, corporate finance partner called Cowgills at the beginning of probably about 18 months into the business. We'd had an accountancy firm to begin with, and we'd kind of outgrown them a bit. We appointed cowgirls after a pitch because we were keen on someone who'd sold a business before who could help advise us through that process and what we should be looking for. And the first thing that they did with us individually was sit down with a spreadsheet, as accountants I want to do, and say, how many kids are you going to have? How many houses are you going to have? How many holidays do you want to go on? And put all these numbers into the magic spreadsheet that says, right, the amount of money that you actually need to retire and never work again is X.
Exactly.
And for me, that was quite an eye-opening moment because I thought it would be a lot more. I thought we were talking tens of millions of pounds for me to retire fully, and that's just not the case. Like I'm not particularly flashy in that regard. I'm just
no.
I reached that number and thought, okay, great, that feels all very achievable. And so being able to do that just felt, that I don't need more than that. And if there was an opportunity to get more than that in the right context where everyone is happy, enjoying life, and in good health and all that kind of thing, then probably might have carried on. But as it happens, doing 5-year numbers, which were also quite aggressive, in 2.5 years through a pandemic, I was just pretty burnt out, to be honest. So all of these things aligned to the point where it was the right time. It felt like the right time for me. I suspect in hindsight, Carrie will have felt like it was the right time for her as well. So it all just aligned in the right way, I think.
Brilliant. Excellent. So if you just talk about, so now we've kind of gone on the journey of kind of what happened. If you just talk about the kind of the potholes, where were the problems? Where were the things that could have really tripped things up on that kind of journey at any point in the growth phase or at the exit phase?
The difficulties, particularly around the exit phase, are things that usually happen well before the exit phase that you don't really know have happened. And that's largely to do with the shareholders agreement and the legal documentation that goes with it.
Which were all written at the beginning. You write them at the beginning, but then you get to the end and go, that's not quite what I really wanted.
Absolutely. And you don't necessarily think you're going to be in the situation you end up in. So you kind of feel like, oh, that's future Stephen's problem. He'll deal with that. And then future Stephen has to deal with it. And you kind of left. You
have to live with the consequences.
Absolutely. Exactly. So the pitfalls, the potholes, the first one I would say is when you are signing a shareholders agreement, etc. And by the way, like, it's completely different to a contract of employment, because a contract of employment is given to you, and if you don't sign it, you don't get a job. So you're kind of forced to do that. And so if you want to violate the terms of your contract of employment, you could probably get away with that, if there's good reason to do it, the right to earn a living and all that kind of thing. No one makes you sign a shareholder agreement. No one forces you to sign and open a business. And so it's much more legally binding. So getting to that stage, and really the bit that was missing for us was a really clear, how do we sell our shares if we want to sell our shares? Because there's then two options. You either go down the route of board agreement. Everyone says, yes, we're all happy with this, and it's all civil and it's all easy, and everyone just kind of does the thing. Or you have to go through the mechanism that's outlined in the shareholders agreement.
Exactly.
And if the mechanism outlined in the shareholders agreement is not very favourable to you, you have obviously got the imperative to make sure everyone on the board is on board with what you want to do, which means all sorts of compromises and negotiations, which may or may not be financial. It might be all sorts of different things. And
it might indeed.
And
they're complicated. And some people in that situation have more leverage than others.
Yes.
So if someone wants to apply their leverage unfairly, then they can. I don't know what happened in your situation at all, but I've seen it happen a lot, whereby people use their leverage to the disadvantage of someone else, but it's legally binding. There's nothing you can do about it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. In our situation, what happened was we got to the point where we'd reached a red line. We couldn't all agree on the same thing. And that just dragged on and on and on until someone gave, basically. And this was largely, I was leaving, so my requirements, my demands are much more straightforward. They're involving me just leaving. and getting paid some money, and that's kind of it. But then it's like the people who are left behind, they have a business, they want to have a business in a good state. What their definition of a good state is subjective. All these kind of things make it much more difficult.
Exactly.
So I'd say the first pitfall is very much like when you're setting up a business, you don't necessarily plan for this eventuality. You're either of the mind, I think, for most business owners I talk to, it feels like a good thing to do, and they plan on never selling it. They plan on just living with it forever, and that feels good to them. Or they plan on absolutely selling it. But either way, they don't have this middle ground of, well, what happens if I need to leave for health reasons? What happens if I have a family emergency? What happens if all these bits of life occur throughout the process? What happens if, me and my co-founder fall out, which thankfully wasn't the case with us, but there's these situations that feel unforeseen, but really could be captured in what happens if one of us leaves? How does that affect the other one, and how does that actual process work?
I mean, deadlocked agreements are sadly very common, whereby you've both got a 50-50 shareholding, and there's no mechanism in the shareholders agreement or the articles that allows an independent third party to unlock that. And you can end up locked in companies with differing views from shareholders and directors. And it drags on and on and on until one person says, you know what, I'll take a deal. And that's just unpleasant. Yeah. So I think the advice here is to anyone listening, when you're setting up your company, assume you're going to sell, or assume there has to be some kind of event whereby one of you exits, get a lawyer to help you draft the agreement, but a lawyer who's done transactions, who knows what those mechanisms are. Would that be fair?
I think that's absolutely right. And independent legal advice for each of you, I think, is a good idea. So you have a company lawyer or a lawyer each or whatever, but getting a lawyer to talk to a lawyer, it sounds unpleasant. But I mean, when you're an agency, you're dealing with this kind of situation every time a client appoints you, right? Your lawyers talk to their lawyers, and it all feels very cringe and you don't like it. But that deal is then done and you can get on with the relationship, and it never really feels damaged by that. It's just, the legal things are there to protect everyone, actually.
Exactly right. Very good. So I'd be really interested also in the growth journey, how did you get from 0 to 120 people? Yes, you had the pandemic, and that obviously helped businesses that were in e-commerce. As agencies, clearly you'd get an uplift in growth. But that's not enough, as I know from working in several agencies. That isn't enough to get you to that kind of scale. If there were 2 or 3 things you had to point out that said those were the big enablers that got us to that scale, what were they?
The first thing was an absolute clarity on who our people would be and where we would find them and how many of them there were and how we would appoint them and all these kind of situations that kind of come with recruitment. We were based in Sheffield, first and foremost, which is a massive advantage for a business like this because there isn't a lot of other agencies. There aren't a lot of other agencies competing with us for talent. But the people of Sheffield drive to Leeds for 25, 30 miles, or they drive to Nottingham for 30 miles, or they go to Manchester. There's a more supply than there is demand for staff in that city. And I think that's probably still true, which is why I'm still there with Ride Shotgun. But I think that's true of Birmingham. I think that's true of Liverpool. I think that's possibly true of Newcastle. There are a bunch of cities which feel like you can look at them and go, there's not much of a scene there. It doesn't feel like a really exciting place to be a digital agency. Right. But that is not a bad thing, actually. Yeah. And you go to Leeds or you go to Manchester and you are in an arms race with other agencies who can potentially pay more money for these people that you want to hire.
Or London. Yeah.
London, absolutely the case. Brighton, another city that's a kind of hotspot for this kind of thing. So
it is.
That's a clear decision to begin with. We also knew that there's 2 universities in Sheffield. I came out of one of them that are churning out really good people that have to leave.
They are.
So we had a real plan of how we would hire people directly from university. And of those 110 people, about 50 were graduates. So that meant that we had to have good training. We were able to get people productive within a few weeks. And, the problems usually come in agencies where you're hiring graduates and expecting them to do the work of very seasoned people, or you don't have the right kind of training in place to do those particular roles for people who haven't done it before. So we had the plans in place for really strong onboarding, a good recruitment process, and training for people in the right roles, with then the decision that there are going to be some roles elsewhere that we can't hire graduates for. We need some experience in these specific things.
Right.
So we had a really clear idea of, okay, that role now needs a really seasoned head in it. So we knew where we would find those people too. And then the third kind of role is the ones where we're bringing on people, because at the end of the day, for the first year especially, we're still a startup. We didn't have the money to compete with the network agencies. So we were hiring people who maybe don't have a lot of management experience, but have a lot of doing experience, and just giving them a shot at it and saying, if you want to do this, we'll back you for it. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. There's still a place for you. But very much kind of a sink or swim type of attitude to growing departments. So we had a bunch of people that would either do really well and we'd hire a load of people underneath them and they would grow rapidly with the business, or they would usually come to us and say, do you know what, this bit isn't for me. I like this bit over here. And we go, no problem. And then we'd hire someone more experienced to do that. So the recruitment side of things, we were absolutely clear on what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do. We had plans in place very early on for things like remote working and how we would deal with that and all these kind of situations. We just planned quite thoroughly with that side of things. So that would be the first thing that helped us to scale very, very quickly. We just made a really conscious effort as well to get to know everyone that we thought would probably work for us at some point. So people that we'd seen on Twitter, etc., just like, we've got no job for you right now, but do you want to meet for a coffee and we'll just have a chat about what you want to do, and then when we are in a state to hire you, we'll talk about that.
So you're talent pipelining,
absolutely, yes, very much so. I don't think many agencies really do that. I think that's one of the big. Everyone has a sales pipeline, but no one necessarily treats their people pipeline the same way.
Exactly.
The second thing that helped us to grow very, very quickly, we talk about positioning quite a lot in the marketing space or the marketing agency space. And you've got some people like Blair Enns to thank for that, who are very vocal about that kind of thing.
And David Baker. Yeah,
David Baker, absolutely too. And a few, right? There's a few people who are banging that drum. But when we're talking to clients, we talk about segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And we kind of forget those two things in agency land a lot of the time, because we have this really clear idea that we well, not everyone, but a lot of people, like, we want our agency to be different. And we'll talk about that in a second, I'm sure. We want our agency to be different, but we don't necessarily say to who. Who do we want to feel like our agency is different? Because we still try and appeal to everyone. We still go, everyone who has a marketing budget should be interested in us, and they should all think we're different, which is just impossible.
Exactly.
So it's really important to have that segmentation to begin with, which, doesn't necessarily have to be massively scientific. It obviously helps if it is. It's not common, I think, to launch a marketing agency with a market research quant survey type of thing behind you. But, if you've got an idea like, okay, I've been, the idea for Rise at 7 really came from my time in-house at Pendragon PLC running an SEO pitch and talking to a bunch of very good agencies about what we needed. And it just felt like everyone was saying the same thing that I didn't agree with. And, I am not the whole market, but my thought process was, if there is £1 billion of SEO revenue in the UK somewhere and 10% of the people think that I'm right, then that's going to be a very big agency and it'll be fine.
Exactly.
So we had this kind of really clear idea of what we wanted to be and who were the right kind of customers for us, what kind of size of client. And I think one of the crucial things, one thing that we did very well, is every time we spoke to a new customer, we tracked a lot of information about that customer, not in a kind of cookie type of a sense, but just a spreadsheet, like how big is the company? What's the structure of the team? Where are they based? What's the challenge that they got in touch with us about? How did they find us? When we pitched, what did we give them? Did we give them a forecast? Did we give them a competitor analysis? Did we do an audit? Did we pitch creative? Huge amounts of information about that, just to try and work out what was working and what wasn't. And so as time went on, we were just more and more laser focused on, we know this is our customer, and we know that we can seem different to them because we are dealing with their specific, unique challenges rather than trying to deal with all the challenges of the market.
Yep.
And, I think that kind of goes on the front end of positioning, the segmentation and targeting bit. But I think another area where agencies don't necessarily get the positioning thing right is drinking their own Kool-Aid when it comes to the creative side of things. Because, Rise at 7 was very creative agency, but what we were absolutely crystal clear of was our customers are the likes of Misguided and Boohoo and, Sephora and these beauty brands and that kind of thing. So what we should do is we should look like an agency that they would work with.
Yeah.
Even if it's going to completely put off HSBC,
Yeah.
And I think that's
because they're not back to your targeting. They're not your target market. So it's fine that they don't actually like the look of your brand and the way that you're positioned because they're not your customer.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the other areas I think a lot of agencies generally get wrong. They have a very clear positioning. Sometimes they know who they're talking to, but they just look kind of sterile. It's just a very generic color palette. The logo looks like it was done in PowerPoint. The website just looks like a standard WordPress website. These kind of things that, it feels like it doesn't matter actually, but yet we as agencies are working in marketing are telling clients that it does. So we should probably believe that ourselves. I think it makes a big difference.
Yep. So that's the second one. Now, the third one, I think, leads us into our other topic, which is around basically customer acquisition, differentiation, marketing strategy as part of BD. How did you get the kind of the third leg? So you got positioning, targeting, segmentation, positioning. You've got talent pipelining, recruitment, very, very clear what you did on that. Now you've got to find some customers because to get that level of scale, you need a lot of demand from the right companies, clearly. So how did you grow your sales pipeline and why is marketing strategy such a key part of that whole business development piece?
So if you think, and I generally am a fan of Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass Institute's way of doing things when it comes to how brands grow. And I think the most basic concept that I think we need to apply in the marketing agency space is excess share of voice, which is basically you need to say more than your competition does. And I know they talk about it in media sense of we need to spend more than our competition does. If we spend more, then we grow. If we spend less, then we shrink. Obviously, that happens over a period of time. But we really should equate that to media in the sense of there's such a thing as earned media. And the way that we scaled was through largely earned media, which was PR and social. So our viewpoint, and we've talked a little bit about what the agency needs to look like, what the agency needs to say. We had a point of view on a lot of things. We weren't afraid to alienate people. We had our very clear, distinctive, this is how we believe search marketing should be done, should be creative, etc. We were boundary pushers in the sense of the kind of ideas that we would pitch and the kind of ideas that we would get signed off and the kind of campaigns that we would show off. Things like the Easter egg with a vibrator in that we did for Ricky or, the various misguided shoots and that kind of thing. That it was much more kind of disruptive than you would typically get in the SEO space. So we were really clear about pushing that kind of thing. But what was important to us is, I think you, and having been a client as well, probably helps with this, the amount of time that our clients think about agencies, especially agencies they're not working with, is so minimal. Like it's not the case that even that client that you've pitched to and you're waiting for a response from thinks about you every day. It's literally, they've got all this stuff going on and they actually have a lot of problems, not just the one that you can solve for them. And they maybe have been able to build a consensus with a group of people at their organization that they should solve this problem. And at that point, it's like, who is top of mind? And the way to be top of mind is to be partially famous, right? And be really well known for the work that you do, but really just to be the last person to say something on their social feed, the last person to say something in their inbox. And I think like one of the big missing things for a lot of agencies, they'll do cold email outreach. Social is just another inbox. It's just another message that you send to people. And it's much less competitive for getting cut through in that kind of way than email, because you can't get an easy sales message across in email, because you have probably 5, 6, 7, 8 other agencies trying to hit the client at the exact same time of the day with a very similar looking message. Whereas in social, you've got the opportunity to stand out a little bit. It's much more visual. It's much more, in context of they're looking for the kind of work that you might do. So
there's two things there, Stephen, just to kind of like kind of bring some of my kind of previous experience to play. If I'm right, what you're saying, and I think it ties up with what I've heard from lots of other people in the sales community that I obviously live in. 95% of your target customers, the one you talked about, 95% of those target customers are not in the market for your services at any one time.
Absolutely.
Only 5% have a problem, as you said, that they need solving now by a third-party agency. Mm-hmm. So in order to be present when they're ready, you have to be front of mind.
Yes.
And to be front of mind, what you're smartly saying is, you've just got to make sure that your social stands out and that your creative and content is head and shoulders above the rest, so that when it does come that time, you're the agency they think of. So it's an inbound strategy, effectively, using earned media.
Yeah.
So you didn't have a big outbound strategy. It was an inbound strategy based on earned media.
Absolutely. We very rarely did any outbound at all. And when we did it, kind of going back to what we've talked about previously, it was so obvious to us that client should be working with us based on who we were and how we presented ourselves. We weren't reaching out to 1,000 businesses. I can remember 2 that we actually reached out to and got anything from, which were Klarna and Lounge Underwear. And Rach Fletcher, who was our new business manager, messaged Klarna, just been like, you guys should totally be doing this. This is how we're doing it for these other brands that kind of look a lot like you, that have the audience that you have. And they're like, yes, we should be doing that. I remember sending the email to Lounge Underwear, and it went something along the lines of, Lounge Underwear is Rise at 7's spirit animal. Look at us and look at you. We were made for each other. Why aren't we working together? Can we have a chat? Brilliant. And that's where that came from. Now, if we'd have sent that to, and I pick on HSBC all the time, very fortunate to work with HSBC nowadays at Right Shotgun. It's a very great client to be working with, very happy about it. But that wouldn't have worked for Rise at 7. If we'd have sent that message to HSBC, if they'd have even opened it, they would have been a little confused.
They're exactly right. Brilliant. Stephen, I'm very conscious of time as well. But seriously, I could talk to you for 3 or 4 hours about this. But let's not, because you're going on holiday soon. So just kind of drawing the kind of threads together. What are your, if in the audience, there's an agency leader, they've got a co-founder, maybe they're at 20 people, they want to get to 50 people. What would be your couple of things where you'd say, these are the things that in their situation you would focus on to get from that 20 to 50 people agency? What are the kind of big things that you'd say focus on?
The first thing to focus on is the relationship between you and your co-founder, and working towards always having a plan for the future, because that makes all of the day-to-day decisions so much easier. You're going to be asked to compromise all over the place. And if you and co-founder are on the same page, it's very easy to not compromise on things, because you're not second-guessing anyone. You're not feeling like you're doing anyone else out of money or whatever it might be. So the first thing is working towards a plan and constantly checking in with each other about how we feel, right? We didn't always do that quite right at Rise at 7, and me and Carrie would be at various points just too busy, and that's when we sort of started to drift apart in ideologies, etc., etc. And whenever we got back together, it was a lot easier to get these things back on track. So first thing there, that means kind of deciding not to do a bunch of stuff. If you want to sell the business, you're going to make very different decisions throughout the whole process of growing the business to if you're not going to sell the business.
Yeah.
And I think it's you often hear agency owners say, I'm going to run it as if I could sell it at any time. And that's good, except you are going to be refusing to compromise on some things that you probably should compromise on if you're wanting to hit the numbers and the scale that you want to get to. So it really does need to be a decision one way or another. You can assume that you're not going to sell it and accidentally find yourself in a position that you are and you've got a great offer, and great, fine, go for it. Likewise, if you think you want to sell it, run it like you're going to sell it, which means deciding to take on that client that you don't really love, that person that you could be working with, etc., etc. Nothing wrong with either one of those ways of doing things. Marketing, absolutely. I think agencies generally are quite poor at marketing themselves. They don't really hire anyone very senior to do their marketing, and they probably don't focus on it as much as they should themselves. I think you can feel quite short-term and trapped in that kind of business development cycle. I need deals now. I need to be calling people. And if I'm going to spend some time doing something, it's trying to get something in the pipeline right now, when actually, as long as things aren't going to shutter overnight, you should probably be thinking, how am I going to make this pipeline fill itself for the next 2 to 3 years by really clearly designing my agency in a way that it looks like the right agency for the kind of customer that I should be working with, really. It's brilliant. It's a flywheel, right? You work really hard to get it going. When it gets going, everything is really easy. And it sounds like it's not going to be, but it is. As soon as you've got a good brand, people recognize, and you've got that inbound coming in, you have all of these opportunities to say, do you know what? We should just hire that person because we can. Or we should just bring on that client because we can. We should invest extra in that thing because we can. You know, that comes from marketing and pipeline.
Exactly. Stephen, it's been really amazing having you as a guest. Thank you ever so much for being very open and candid about your journey. Fascinating about the growth story. And where can people find out more about you?
LinkedIn is probably the social network that you will find me nowadays. I'm not really on any of the other ones. And I'm currently working for an agency called Ride Shotgun, which, if you want to know more, is rideshotgun.global. That's probably like the 2 places you can find me. I think, like with all things, you should pick your lanes and double down on those things. So you don't find me on X anymore.
Yeah, no, same here. Absolutely. LinkedIn's where I hang out as well. Stephen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you ever so much for joining us on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast.
Mike, thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.